Good afternoon. Can you hear me? Not sure about this mic. Okay. My name is Steve Shropshire. I am Brian's brother-in-law. So his sister Amy is my wife. And these are our kids, Anna and Lexi, so they're Brian's nieces. On behalf of the family, I would just like to start off by saying a very sincere thank you to you all. I think everyone in this room feels that kind of a cliche to say, let me know what I can do. It can feel hollow. I know because I say it myself. But honestly, what you all can do, you've been doing all week. You've reached out, whether through a call, a visit, a text, a Facebook post, or especially a prayer. The amount of love and support that you have shown to this family has been remarkable. And I say this on behalf of Amy, Sandra, and Carrie. Reaching out like that lets the family know that Brian's life had an impact in this world. And that he will not be forgotten. Whether he impacted you directly or through one of these family members that you know, he is the reason you're here today. And that gives comfort to the family because you're all here to celebrate his life. If I ramble a little bit and sound a little unprepared, it's because I am unprepared. Just as we were all unprepared when we received the news about Brian. I don't know about you guys, but when Amy told me, the words did not register. She was yelling at me on the phone, and I couldn't quite understand. I couldn't comprehend it. It was a bad dream. The fact that I'm standing here right now is surreal to me. It's tragic. But as I said, Brian is my brother-in-law, and he is Anna and Lexi's uncle. But those words, brother-in-law and uncle, they simply are not strong enough to describe who Brian was in our family. He was absolutely a brother to me. And I don't know how to even describe what he was to these kids here. He was a friend, even a hero to them. They loved him so much and will miss him so much. I have a feeling that many of you in this room could say the same thing. Maybe the words nephew, friend, cousin, co-worker just don't adequately describe what you felt about Brian. And why is that? What was it about him that made us all feel this way? Well, one reason, I think his Uncle Jim said it best. Brian was a gentle soul. To me, Brian brought an extremely calming presence to the world around him. He physically looks like his father, but he has his mother's quiet personality. And Carrie, that's not a shot, but you and I are verbal, a little more verbal than the rest, right? As you can tell in many of those pictures that have been scrolling, my family always spent vacations with Brian. Usually at the beach, but we had a couple Disney trips thrown in there as well. And as you might imagine, when these two were young, life was chaotic. But Brian could spend a week amongst this wall of noise and confusion that my family traveled with, and I never one time saw him show even a hint of anger, frustration, or impatience. Just this past August, when we were down at Carolina Beach for our vacation, one of the hurricanes came through, and we decided to ride out the storm. And from what I recall, Brian went on to bed like it was a normal night. I don't recall seeing him during the night. I stayed up until the storm passed. I think most of us did. But that gives you an idea of what Brian was like in the rest of his life. The storm could be swirling around him, but he was calm, and it gave everybody else a sense of calm. In fact, if you're familiar with the fruit of the Spirit in Galatians 5, I think you might agree that Brian pretty much exhibited all 9 of them. Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, faithfulness, and self-control. Name one of those where Brian was lacking. He wasn't. And that's extremely rare. When I think about Brian, several other words come to mind. Music, especially live music. Travel, photography, the beach. Brits Donuts, for those of you familiar with Carolina Beach. Sports. And then that unbelievably awesome beard he was able to sprout. One last word I think of is quiet. He was quiet. When Lexi here was maybe 3, she popped out her pacifier one day and said, Brian doesn't talk. A couple weeks later, she's mentioned to me that spies don't talk. And I'm pretty sure she was convinced that Brian was a spy for at least a little while. I met Brian for the first time when Amy got us some basketball tickets to a game down in Chapel Hill. So he came over from Wilmington, I came over from Boone. And she was still in the band at the time, so she couldn't sit with us. So I got to know him pretty well that day. But the one thing that I remember the most, that sticks out the most in my mind, is that when Brian left, he hugged his sister. Now, I love my sisters and brothers, and I was just my sisters and brother. I was just joking with them when they came in that I think we kind of originated social distancing. We're not a big hugging family. But we were in our early 20s, I guess, at that time. And ever since that day, I can't recall a time when Brian left to go back to Wilmington or go back home that he did not hug his family and tell them he loved them. And as you get a little older, as many of us are, and you feel like life is starting to take more from you than it gives you, you realize what a special habit that simple act is, a hug and I love you. Amy and Sandra and Ann and Lex were able to spend 3 days in Wilmington with Brian just 2 weeks ago, and what would end up being the last week of Brian's life. I didn't confirm this with Amy, but I am 100% sure that when they left, they all hugged each other and said they loved each other. And I know that Kerry couldn't make that trip because he'd had that surgery, but I guarantee the last time Kerry saw him, he hugged him and told him he loved him. And what else? How else would you want to leave it with somebody? What more would you want to say? What better way to say goodbye? And I'll leave you with this. As we were all caught so unprepared for the bad news that we received this week, the same fate awaits all of us. Anytime a tragedy like this happens, I think it's human nature to reflect on our own mortality. I would encourage each of you to allow Brian's life and its tragic end to remind you to give thought to what comes next. If you know me, you know that I'm a follower of Jesus Christ, and our family is resting in the fact that Brian was also a believer. If you're not a believer, I would encourage you to seek the truth so that you don't leave this life unprepared. And so that you too can know that same hope that we read about in 1 Corinthians, where it says, "The eye has not seen, nor has the ear heard, nor has the heart of man imagined what God has in store for those who love him." Our family gets a lot of hope from this verse right now as we imagine Brian hearing and seeing those promises. Thank you very much.